Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2017. This is day 13, or it's supposed to be day 13. It's actually the 14th, but I got a little behind, so now I'm trying to catch up. If you haven't figured out the pattern yet, um, when I'm like this, generally that means I'm going to be talking about something serious. So if you don't want to listen to something serious, just skip over this one. My last one was about, uh, I think, a hilarious story about the first D&D character I ever played. So go watch that one instead. I promise it's more fun. This one is not at all, because it's really scary and weird for me. So I have no idea what it's going to be like for you guys to hear it described. So, I mentioned in my last video that I've been falling behind on my daily December for quote reasons that I would explain later. Well, this is me explaining them. As you guys know, I'm currently going through withdrawal from a medication that I was prescribed, and I had a psychiatrist um, watching over me and everything, and treating me regularly. So this is not. This is something that both the psychiatrist and I knew was eventually going to happen, and we chose this point in time on purpose. It's the beginning of my term, so if I lose a month or so to the withdrawal effects, it's not going to affect my ability to continue with school, and I don't really have any other obligations right now that are really major. I've gotten rid of almost every other obligation I have. Despite that, it's really, really bad. And it's getting worse now that I have reduced my dosage. Again, every week I will reduce my dosage by 1 milligram, which is basically 10% of what I was at before, because I used to be at 10 milligrams a day of diazepam. And now I'm at 8 milligrams a day. And next week I'll be at 7, and the week after that I'll be at 6, and then the week after that I'll be at 5, and then I think I'll be able to see my psychiatrist again, and we'll see if it's safe for me to continue scaling it down until I'm off of it completely. But one of the a lot of the side effects I expected, because diazepam has been used to treat my anxiety. Taking it out means my anxiety goes into overload, which is a very common thing to happen with withdrawal in general. Whatever it is that caused you to take the habit-forming or addictive substance will go into overdrive as your body tries to trick you into thinking that you need it more than you actually do. So that's a very, very common withdrawal symptom. Diazepam, which is part of a class of drugs called benzodiazepines, have a couple unique aspects or symptoms of withdrawal that can actually be deadly, which is why we're being very careful. And I have a psychiatrist who's very carefully monitoring my reduction in this medication. And those are seizures and strokes during withdrawal, especially if you go like cold turkey or you make very large drops in what you're taking. it can cause both seizures and strokes, both of which can cause irreparable brain damage and can kill you. So that is expected, and thus far, beyond the psychogenic tremor getting worse as a direct relation to my anxiety getting worse, we haven't had issues with either of those. If I were to have a stroke, you guys would know about it as soon as possible, because that's a major thing. And with medical science the way that it is, if it's caught early enough, the damage that a stroke can cause can be completely reversed or almost completely reversed. But you have to get into treatment like within, I think it's like less than an hour of this stroke happening, or 30 minutes or something. I don't know the exact amount of time. The faster you get in, the more of a chance that there's not going to be any permanent damage or anything. So due to the fact that I live with my family, if I was to have a stroke or something like that, there are people here all the time. They could call an ambulance. They could get me to the hospital if I was unable to do it myself. So I'm as safe as I possibly can be. And again, these are all expected. These are all things that I have warned my family about, that, hey, these are things you need to look out for, because if you see signs of them, I may not notice them. So, yeah. But one of the unforeseen side effects of this is I have begun to dissociate. Dissociation is kind of a broad psychological term that refers to a lot of different symptoms that all revolve around a break from reality. There are things like depersonalization, where you feel yourself that you are not real. There's derealization, which is where you don't think the world itself is real. You feel like you're dreaming all the time. You yourself are real, but the rest of the world isn't. And then there's actually a bunch of different disorders around the idea that all involve dissociation in some way, shape, or form. And they're all along a spectrum in the DSM-5, which is very common in the DSM-5, is they turned a lot of different mental disorders into spectrums just to be able to treat them better. And at the extreme end of the spectrum is what's called dissociative identity disorder, which is what used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder. It's unbelievably rare for someone to actually have dissociative identity disorder. Like it's the unicorn of psychology. And a lot of people have been misdiagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, where when it was multiple personality disorder, it was actually a lot more common to misdiagnose somebody with multiple personality disorders and actually have these other personalities not be a creation of the person's mind, but are actually suggested unintentionally by the therapist or psychologist that they are seeing, which is why DID is so rarely diagnosed, and it's such a touchy subject in psychology in general, because it has been shown multiple times that if you do not tread carefully with people that are experiencing dissociation, you can actually, a therapist can actually give suggestions that make the unconscious mind actually create alternate personalities and things like that when none actually exist. It's simply been bad therapy, basically. I do not have dissociative identity disorder. What I do have is I had a childhood trauma that I've spoken about before, and I can't right now because I'm not in a a good place mentally that I can talk about it. But it was traumatic. And my brain decided at that point that I couldn't deal with it. And so it blocked the memory. I repressed the memory of the entire incident to the point where I didn't even know it happened, which is a form of dissociation. You actually cut yourself off from reality. My brain cut myself off from reality while it was happening, and then I had it's called dissociative amnesia, if I remember correctly. I simply could not remember. There was a gap in my memory. So to my conscious mind, it was like it never happened. And as I've gone through therapy more often, I've discovered that dissociation is one of my brain's go-to defense mechanisms when I feel threatened, or when I feel like I'm in danger. There have been studies and psychologists that have argued that dissociation can actually be helpful in the moment because basically your brain can't handle whatever you are going through, and forcing you to try and deal with something that you can't handle can cause irreparable mental health damage. So in the short term, dissociation can actually be helpful. It's the body defending itself, or the mind defending itself from something it can't handle. However, in the long term, in general, dissociation is not good, and should eventually be dealt with, generally through things like cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, and other things along those lines. There isn't really a medication that helps with dissociation because they don't really understand entirely how it works. We just know the symptoms, and we know that it does happen on a relatively regular basis. And a lot of people that experience dissociation, they experience non-clinical dissociation or non-chronic dissociation. I can't remember what it's called. Basically, they experience symptoms of dissociation just, again, as a defense mechanism. It happens once, then they deal with it. Me, on the other hand, since I've started dialing back the medication, or since my doctor started dialing back the medication, and I'm agreeing with her because she's a psychiatrist and knows what she's talking about, I've started having issues with time. I can't tell. It's hard to explain, but I can't feel the passage of time, and time doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. There are some times when it feels like hours and hours and hours have passed, and when I actually look, it's been 2 minutes. And then other times where it feels like no time has passed at all, and it's 8 hours later, and I haven't moved, or I haven't even finished reading the page that I'm on. I can't tell the passage of time. And it's really bizarre because it kind of feels like me as a person, it's kind of like everybody else is in a river, just kind of floating along in their canoes and rafts and everything like that, and going along, and I'm kind of floating above it. And every so often I'll go under the water and get caught up in the current, and then every so often I'll be above the water, and just the world will pass, everybody else will just pass me by as I'm just floating there doing nothing. And so it's really, really bizarre. But because of that, I'm having an extremely difficult time getting anything done because I can't tell how much time I've spent doing something without either constantly looking at a clock, which I forget to do, or setting up gratuitous amounts of alarms to remind me that I have to do certain things. And so making videos, even simple things like eating, I I forget that I'm supposed to eat, or I forget that I'm supposed to drink, because in my mind, I'm not supposed to eat every 2 or 3 minutes. And when I feel like only 2 or 3 minutes have passed, despite the fact that like my stomach hurts because I haven't eaten anything in a day or and a half, it doesn't make sense to me why that would be happening, because it doesn't feel like that much time has passed. And then conversely, it can feel like I've spent an entire day working on something when it's only been, 10 minutes. And I'll be completely exhausted because I'm like, wow, man, I just spent like 12 hours doing this thing. When in all actuality, I've only spent about 10 minutes. So, it's very, very weird. I'm speaking with my therapist about it and keeping her apprised. And I see my psychiatrist again. I'll mention it to her as well. My therapist specifically doesn't think it's dangerous or anything like that at this particular point in time. It's just extremely uncomfortable and makes it unbelievably difficult for me to do anything. Because again, I can't remember to do things at certain times, or I can't figure out when I'm supposed to do anything, and it becomes very, very confusing when, even simple things like, going to the bathroom or something like that it doesn't make sense to me, because either it'll be, wow, I haven't gone in 12 hours when it's only been 2 minutes, or I don't get this, it's only been a minute and a half. Why in the world do I feel like I have to go? It must be nothing. When in all actuality, I've been sitting in a chair for 12 hours. So yeah, it's very, very weird and extremely difficult to deal with, in addition to the rest of the symptoms. And my therapist just thinks it's the idea that, again, heightened stress, along with other symptoms of withdrawal and stuff like that, are making my brain go, you can't deal with this. This is bad. And so it's starting to dissociate as a way to protect myself, protect my mind. Again, it's my brain's go-to defense mechanism. Some people, denial is their go-to mechanism. Some people, it's projection, where you project the feelings that you're feeling onto somebody else. Mine is dissociation. And it's actually very common for children that have suffered abuse and trauma from a very young age to develop a predisposition for dissociation as just your first line of defense mentally. So none of this stuff is completely out of the blue or anything like this. My therapist has told me that there's a very good chance I've had issues with dissociation my entire life, and I just didn't know. The reason I have such issues with my memory now is because while you're dissociating, you're not really forming memories the way that you normally would. And so it causes issues with memory. It can actually lead to amnesia, where I forget entire days and stuff like that. And that's been happening for, I don't know, like a year now, a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. I don't know. I'll lose days, weeks that I for the life of me can't remember. what happened. And I'll have conversations with people where I'll say, the same thing 3 or 4 times because I simply can't remember if I'd said it yet or not. So it's not fun. It's extremely debilitating. But yeah, that's why my upload schedule is so weird. I literally cannot. I can't feel time passing. I have to guess, and it makes it very difficult for me to be able to budget my time and get things done and a lot of different things. Even, again, simple things like getting up and getting food and stuff like that. It's really, really difficult for me because I don't understand why I have to do it now. And I don't understand why sometimes, my stomach will start hurting or it'll be growling or something like that when it seems like I ate 5 minutes earlier. Or I'll be absolutely parched and I'll be like, well, I just finished drinking my drink, so there's no reason that. Well, no, actually, I hadn't drinking anything in 12 hours, or I hadn't eaten anything in 24 hours, or something like that. So, anyway, I wanted to bring you guys up to date on this newest development. Again, I'm not in danger or anything like that. It's just really uncomfortable and very confusing. That's my phone telling me I'm not spending enough money on a game I'm not spending money on anymore. So yeah. It's really weird. It really, really is. It's so hard to describe and explain to anybody unless you actually had to deal with some form of dissociation before, and it's really unsettling to feel like you're kind of dropping in and out of time. Like sometimes yeah. Anyway, that's all for me right now. I may try and get one more video out after Critical Role tonight because they're doing the big wrap-up episode. I don't know. Again, we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's all for me. See you guys some other time. Bye-bye.